Have you ever heard of the Slender Man?
I think that Slender Man is the most iconic internet boogeyman.
It's the idea of a monster in a business suit.
He's too tall, his limbs are too long.
Nobody likes when things look wrong, and that's exactly what he was.
It was that perfect note of alien but familiar.
It was a distorted person thing with no face, and you know nothing about it. Like, that was thrilling.
You don't know what his motives are. It's clearly very sinister. It involves murder and death.
He's stripped of any clear intention.
It felt like something that come out of the woodwork of the internet.
I think it scared all of us initially when we saw it. Otherwise, we wouldn't feel the need to use it in any regard.
I like to say that someone like Slender Man is a bit of an open source horror monster.
That's what I liked about Slender Man and the Slenderverse, was that it was such a bare bones myth that you could do anything you wanted with.
There was also this sense of an empowerment of, if you do care about it, then you add to it.
The sky is the limit as far as this character goes. And I think that that's part of what has allowed the Slenderverse as a whole to expand in the way it has.
Slenderman went on to become like one of the biggest, online creepypastas of all time.
All of this unfolding essentially in real time at a very rapid pace with so many different writers. Like, that's something that I think is beautiful and worth studying.
It seemed to be like there was a collective unconscious, that everyone saw this and said, I want to do that.
They all took the ball and ran in different directions with it.
They changed the game.
We took something that at that point had just been like a forum image, maybe even a YouTube series, and we turned it into something grand.
We had hundreds of years of human culture and storytelling that tropes developed. This was a microcosm of all human storytelling in 10 years' time that was interesting, oversaturated, and blown up.
If you spend enough time on the internet, you'll eventually hear whispers of a figure of yore. A once looming presence in communities based around internet horror, independent filmmaking, video games, true crime, and even sketch comedy. And every once in a while, people still mention his name. Slender Man. Of course, the internet is no immemorial creation, nor is Slender Man a time-worn legend. Only a decade ago, the tall, faceless, business suit-wearing creature was the driving force behind some of the most influential developments in online storytelling and independent filmmaking, particularly in the medium of unfiction, a branch of storytelling built for the digital age of the internet, revolving around realism and immersion. It commonly utilizes realistically filmed vlog-style videos known as found footage, in-universe websites and blogs, and cryptic puzzles on the web or in real life. Many of these digital folktales are shaped by their viewers' actions in what are known as alternate reality games, or ARGs. The medium of unfiction served as the bedrock for Slenderman's mythology, and in turn, Slenderman's mythology propelled unfiction to unprecedented heights. Slenderman is no time-worn legend, and yet even in the 10 short years since his golden age, his history has become rich, complex, and deeply relevant to the nature of the modern internet. In that time, thousands of independent creators came together to collaboratively construct an interconnected constellation of YouTube web series and online blogs revolving around the Slender Man, sometimes seen by fans as a Marvel-style universe of interlinked stories and characters. Within this Slenderverse, a community of creators and a tapestry of rich stories, not only was an internet horror legend built from nothing, but new artists were given the chance to create, forge true friendships, rise to fame, and weather unexpected tragedies. My name is Alex Hera, and I will be your host in this investigation of the history of the Slenderverse. To take our first step, we must first go back to Slenderman's modest origins. Back to the events and culture that led to his creation in the first place. Back to the distant year of 2009.
You know, this was in 2009, so it was all of this new stuff was available all at once. You know, it was like YouTube had only been around a couple of years, Twitter had only been around a couple of years, so it was just kind of like, we have all this new stuff at our disposal, let's do something with it.
This was all new. It was all like new stuff for everybody in a sense. Because I feel like on YouTube, a lot of content at that time was pretty, it was the Wild West.
You have to remember, YouTube was very young. This idea of being a YouTube celebrity was not a thing.
There's a lot to be said about the way the internet has changed. A lot of the early Slenderverse stuff took place before influencers and social media really started to influence the way people interacted with the world.
It was more entertainment or like current events or vlogging, and there were some like unfiction-esque projects, but I don't even think people would be calling them that at that time.
And those did have impact in small ways as kind of bubbling up hot topics on the internet during their days. But in terms of scope, the only important works really before the Slenderverse in terms of unfiction were by and large corporate products in order to help promote things like movies and video games. That's actually the cradle of the entire form, really. It stems from the marketing promotion for AI, artificial intelligence, which was called The Beast, from which the term alternate reality game actually comes from, as well as the original tenets of what an alternate reality game is, which is this is, and in parentheses, not a game. Although, when it comes to direct influences on the Slenderverse, the only true inspiration I can point to is Blair Witch Project.
I think Blair Witch kind of, by default, steals that, like, what inspired so many people at that time.
I'm not huge into the Blair Witch Project, but what made the Blair Witch Project so real were the creators saying, "Where's Heather?" Everyone was like, "Oh my God, where is this missing person?" And we tried to emulate that same kind of feel.
Things like Blair Witch Project, found footage horror films in general, played a huge role in the style of the Slenderverse.
Basically, the Blair Witch on YouTube is how I explained it to like my parents or classmates or my teachers at the time.
You know, I'm like, oh, it's just like the Blair Witch Project. It's just like Paranormal Activity, except it's on the internet. That's so cool. And it felt so real.
I think everybody got an idea what you were talking about. But at that point, there was a lot of pioneering being done. Like, you couldn't have done a web series in 2000. There was no infrastructure for it. But now, everybody having YouTube, everyone having a smartphone, that was like the first cusp of people hanging out and doing this sort of thing.
It just really was such a different time in the internet, and how vulnerable and like willing to be so intimate and vulnerable to the blank space of the internet.
You come along with, yeah, like a flip or, you know, a little crappy handy cam or whatever. People were more forgiving, you know, and being like, oh, okay, yeah, you know, this is YouTube. If anything, I feel like it just made it feel more realistic.
The Slenderverse is kind of a time capsule of that era, that like late 2000s, early 2010s troll face, and like that era.
It felt like an urban legend being born in the internet very naturally, and it was cross-platform in this way that felt correct to the internet at the time.
As far as the appeal goes, I don't know, a bunch of young 20-somethings at the dawn of the social media age using these exciting new tools, but all still slightly paranoid that a faceless man in the suit might be on the other end watching them. I don't know. Maybe there was just something in the air.
I mean, I think at this point, the like literal origins are pretty well known with the whole was the Mega Monster thread on SomethingAwful.
The Slenderman was first created on the SomethingAwful forums in 2009 as a part of an image contest.
The character was created by Eric Knudsen, aka Victor Surge.
A bunch of people were asked to create like haunted or cursed like Photoshop images.
Initially, it was created as just a couple of weird photoshopped pictures, black and white, with a bunch of children and a weird tall guy with tentacles and no face.
Most people are familiar with those initial two images, which is the Sterling City Library Blaze image, and the We Didn't Want to Kill Them picture. You know, the children in the foreground with Slender Man kind of walking behind them. Those are the two that people are most commonly associating with Surge, but there were other pictures after the fact.
Those images were just downright creepy, and then the little blurbs that they had to go along with it, that was the kind of stuff that catches my attention.
It was a little trajectory of a story that Surge had written in his series of posts. It wasn't just like scattered things. It was somebody posting pictures, and then by the end, this person was being hunted by the Slender Man after having posted a bunch of these pictures.
We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But his persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983. Photographer unknown, presumed dead. One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library Blaze. Notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Maybe I'll do some more research. I've heard there may be a couple more legit Slender Man photographs out there. Slender Man safety procedures require this incident's physical photographic evidence to be disposed of by no later than 10:20. I'm done with this Slender Man stuff. It's starting to make me uneasy. Luckily, my friend is coming over. My friend is here, but he just came in. Barely made it up the stairs, got a picture, and locked the door, but it's right there in the hall. Don't look at its pictures. It doesn't want to be known about. Don't look!
Jesus. Slenderman needs to be made into a horror ARG or something. This stuff is brilliantly creepy.
When I finally saw the guy in the background, I lost it. This is gonna give me nightmares.
When I did the posts on Something Awful, there was no plan. There was no, I saw the first couple pages of that thread, and I said, oh, these are pretty good. They're kind of creepy, it looks like there's a ghost there, but I can do something creepier than that, I'll just throw this together. And it was literally 10-15 minutes of thought, and I started gathering assets, opened Photoshop, and I just started, putting them together.
After a while, Slender Man became the star of the thread and then the star of the forum, in a sense of like everyone loved this, new creature.
It's really hard to pin down any one inspiration. Even in that original Something Awful thread, Victor Surge gave several different portrayals of the Slender Man. So it has always been kind of an inconsistent character from the very start.
I think that's just part of why the mishmash is so fascinating, because the origin is so unclear, because it's like the origin is not the origin. The copy became something different, and then the copy of that became something even different, and it just expanded and grew and evolved into its own thing so many times over.
What if I didn't spontaneously come up with Slender Man? What if that's what it wants you to think? Come to think of it, I don't really remember those days last week, or even making those posts.
I think I was in the thread, like I saw the thread when it was the first photos came out, where they were basically the thread just working together to make an internet urban legend.
I've heard the phrase many times. It's like an internet urban legend where, everyone sort of had their own take on it, their own version of Slender Man that they wanted to create, the story that they wanted to tell.
I've been seriously debating sharing these, but after Victor Surge's post, I feel I have to. Slender Man is fucking fantastic. Gonna try and add a little bit to it. Hope you don't mind, Victor.
I am absolutely loving the direction this thread has taken. Victor Surge, you have truly created a monster.
All this stuff is amazing. Keep it up.
When it was first coming out, it was like, all right, so this is a modern day made up monster, and it's kind of like, open source in a way. At that point, no one's thinking about making money or anything.
They sparked enough interest that then people extrapolated these images and wrote stories about them that were compelling enough for more people to write stories.
The features are so unidentifiable, not just the lack of face, but the character not having many iconic things weighing it down. It allowed for people to see the character as a canvas.
The literal imagery of him is creepy because it's uncanny. But I think that like lack of existing media of where he came from, that to me is what made that blank slate, like literally.
It's a faceless, like, cosmic horror that you can pretty much project whatever you want onto in terms of intent.
Not knowing what his motives were, you know, like a Lovecraft story. Where does he come from? What does he want? Is he related to Cotton Eye Joe? No.
I think that's the same shit that makes Cthulhu scary. You know what I mean? Because it's like, what the fuck is that thing? What is it? Like, you know what I mean? It just gets worse and worse the more you look at it, but you know nothing. You know what I mean? You know nothing about him.
Making him ominous and ambiguous and leaving it up to the sense of the unknown for what he is doing and what he intends to do, and all these things really opens the doors and makes the character something people can latch onto and, you know, add their own interpretations, you know, for better or worse, and really work with and do their own thing with.
And then that was compelling enough for the creators of Marble Hornets to make a video web blog.
I think it was probably Troy Wagner, who was actually on that Something Awful thread, who saw the Slender Man and then had the idea to create Marble Hornets, basically like a found footage Blair Witch Project-esque story based around the Slender Man. And that blew up like immediately, probably by people on the forum.
They're embellishing. They're creating more pieces of his narrative and pieces of his story. Stuff that Victor Surge never intended. But then again, Victor Surge never intended any of this shit. Me, Marble Hornets, any of it. The point is that we took it and we ran with it.
It's like I said about Slender Man. Like, it's not something you want to, you know, say that's not right. That's not Slender Man. It's the internet, and trying to control the internet. You know what happens.
Hi, my name's Tim Sutton, and I'm the co-writer and co-star of Marble Hornets. Troy Wagner and Joseph Delage were both forums posters, and they were the ones who sort of set everything in motion. And then I think it was after the first 2 entries were up was whenever I got a message from Troy on AOL Instant Messenger to give you an idea of the time period. You would have been in 2009 watching the YouTube channel of a young man who was going through the leftover old videotapes of a friend of his that he has not had any contact with in a few years.
About 2 or 3 years ago, a film school friend of mine, Alex, was working on his first feature-length movie.
The tapes are leftover footage from the student film that his friend was making, which was also called Marble Hornets.
After about 2 months of on and off shooting, Alex dropped his pet project completely. He just said he never wanted to work with the footage again.
And he has memories of something strange happening during the course of the production of his friend's short film, and his friend telling him to burn these tapes and never show them to anyone, and then he disappeared.
I'm going back to my home, and I'm burning these tapes.
But he just couldn't leave well enough alone.
I've decided to begin going through the tapes later tonight. I'm hoping all I find is an unfinished student film and nothing else. That would sure put me at ease now that I'm thinking about it again.
And everything that happens afterwards is started from him watching through these old videotapes. It felt like unexplored territory, because this was still, like I said, this was the early days of all the YouTube and social media and everything, so it kind of felt like a new frontier, kind of. We were venturing out into unknown waters.
When Marble Hornets came out, it's like, all right, so that gave you a visual that you could, you know, because every story was accompanied by, you know, like Photoshops or drawings, and like that gives you like all right, this is creepy. But then them making the video series was like, all right, you can see this in real life now. Like, this is something, it literally took like the storybook into real life.
This idea of it was behind you the whole time and you didn't see it was very natural to a visual format. And I think that that's why the video weblogs, also I feel like an ancient dinosaur saying video weblogs, but that the vlogs became such a compelling and kind of pillar of the way that the mythology expanded.
There were hints of Slender Man on the internet, and I can't remember my first exposure point. What I do remember is that looking up what the hell is this Slender Man thing, it led me directly to Marble Hornets.
We were watching this thing called Marble Hornets on YouTube.
Marble Hornets is a Blair Witch Paranormal Activity kind of take on this already internet-based fake urban legend of the Slender Man.
Everybody around that time was recognizing, oh yeah, it's this thing from this web series. You know, if you trace the roots back, most people were saying it's from this web series, Marble Hornets. And that is when I got into it.
I'm hoping that Marble Hornets will kind of open the door for, you know, people to mess with him.
Everyone started using that as a means of like sort of the blueprint, if you will.
Most people, when Marble Hornets had come out and the Slenderverse started, were drawing little things from Marble Hornets.
Camera distortion and vomiting black stuff.
Slender Man sort of like teleporting.
People getting sick and like memory loss.
Audio visual distortion as evidence of like the presence of the Slender Man. That was a huge thing in every series.
I don't care who came before, they are directly responsible for the massive influence of VHS glitching whenever there's a presence of a monster. Because they are the direct roots, observably, of this kind of effects touch and aesthetic in all of these projects that came after. It is the grand root.
Partially came from the technical limitations of just how do you make it a threat without it being able to move very much. It's almost like its abilities are dictated by its appearance. Like, what would you expect this thing to be able to do just by looking at it? And it's like, well, it would kind of look strange if it moved really fast, or, you know, if it jumped like Mario. You look at it and it's already, the wheels start turning. Like, you know, there's, if it's lacking a face, then it's lacking the traditional human forms of communication. So what's it gonna do? We didn't necessarily say that it was communication per se, but, you know, I think that's probably where like the audio video distortion came from in our case. The way that we did it, it's like, I'm not sure what else you would do. Like, I know some other people did, like, I think he's got like spider legs sometimes, or like tentacles and things. I think we decided against the tentacles just because they may have felt too specifically like a Lovecraft thing, maybe. I think we did what everyone ended up doing, which is you pick the parts you like and you leave behind the parts you don't.
I think that, you know, they use the character really sparingly, and they manage, especially in those early episodes of Marble Hornets, to really like craft a story and characters around him that keeps you engaged and also like dreading the next time the character's going to show up.
I first heard of Slender Man by a completely unrelated creepypasta story that I heard on the internet that had nothing to do with Marble Hornets. And then at some point in high school, I stumbled across one of those To the Arc videos from Marble Hornets with no context at all. And I was just hypnotized by it.
Back then, YouTube used to have this feature called video replies. This was back in the days when they were still emphasizing like the you part of YouTube, like the community part. So anybody who posted a video, you could record your own video as a video reply, and it would show up underneath the video that you were replying to. So back then, if you were to go to the Marble Hornets YouTube page, you would go to this entry, and then you would see a video reply from this other account called To The Arc underneath it. Because we were locked into that found footage format, we could only experiment in certain ways in the main show, because it always had to be a camera being held by somebody, being carried around by someone in a specific place. It becomes an object that exists in the world, and you have to plan around that accordingly. So in a way, the To The Arc videos were ways for us to kind of tinker around with things that didn't follow that format as much. the main series didn't really have room for a stop motion animated baby doll crawling across the floor, but the ARC videos, we could do that kind of stuff. So it was kind of the playground for us. It was kind of where we got to play with all our toys in our toy box, and then just also happened to have it tie into the main show.
I remember it took me like 3 to 5 business days to actually put the pieces together, like to find the 2 accounts and find someone else who already figured out the codes, because there was no way that I was going to do that. And then I was like, this is the best piece of art I've ever found in my life.
There were instances where narratively the messages were helpful and they did clarify things. But as brilliantly aesthetic as that was, I will never stop holding a grudge against Troy for all that binary code. It's the equivalent in unfiction of "it was a dark and stormy night."
We were doing the ARG stuff, but we always kind of considered it supplemental. Like, you get more out of it if you're following all of these things, but also if you only know about the YouTube channel, then you're not necessarily missing anything huge, you know what I mean? Thinking back to, like, say, the Twitter account, it would always be things that would be in between videos or just sort of, like, building up to the next video. So it was, if you're watching it just on YouTube, you're not missing anything vital. But if you were following the Twitter, then you might be like, oh, new video's coming soon. He's in the woods again. You know, he's hunting around for something. Oh no, he says he's lost. What could happen next? You know, and that was definitely a conscious decision, because I remember in season 3 especially, us sort of saying it's going to exist as a complete work much longer than it's going to consist as an incomplete work. If someone comes across this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever, how easy is it going to be for them to even find everything? So we tried to not future-proof it necessarily, but we were shooting them with that in mind, which I think was probably frustrating pacing-wise for some people at the time, but people don't seem to be holding that against us too much.
I see the first season of Marble Hornets as truly, like, near masterpiece.
Marble Hornets was reviewed by like Roger Ebert or whatever, you know, it's hard to match that.
You saw so many other things sprout up using the first season as an inspiration.
As far as audience size and impact when it comes to numbers, Marble Hornets is still the God King. It always will be. And that is the cradle of all this.
It was trying to carve out its own space in the culture of found footage and you know, online horror and all that stuff. And it did. I think it's basically like one of the most important like pieces of web media to get into analog horror and other such places. Like, it did a lot.
I don't know, I just kind of got wrapped up in the whole thing, because it kind of started like snowballing fairly quickly, at least. You know, it was doing big numbers in 2009 terms, so seeing like 50,000 views was like mind-blowing. You know, we'd seen reactions on forums, and we'd seen reactions on social media, but at the end of the day, that's still, it's numbers on a screen, it's words on a screen, it's lights on my pocket, well, no, not my pocket computer, we didn't have those yet. So we got invited to our first convention in October of 2011. It was in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a smaller convention. It was one of the indie ones, i.e. the fun ones, the good ones. And there was some musicians there. There was some voice actors there. Ellen McLean, the voice of GLaDOS from the Portal video games, was there. And so, you know, there were like people that we knew, and people that we knew were well known elsewhere. And so it was like, we were still also on like the invited guest list or whatever, but it was like in the room for the opening ceremonies, it's like all the other guests was at this table and we sat at the next table over, because we were like, we're just doing internet stuff. Nobody has any idea who we are. And so it was like calling people up one by one, and then they call us up last, and the room explodes, and we were all just kind of like, what the hell? And that was the first, we had no idea it was going to be like that. That was a very strange experience to see firsthand, but then also to go back afterwards to class the next day. Those are the kind of things where if you ever wonder why anyone who gets at least a little bit famous on the internet seems to slowly lose their mind, that's stuff like that is part of the reason. But no, in general, I figured it would just be like, you know, a fun Something Awful forums thing, and then, you know, the unfiction forums. It was a very small thing until all of a sudden it wasn't. It's just numbers on a screen until all of a sudden one day you're standing next to the lady from the Portal games. If you could say we had like any kind of capital I impact or anything like that, I think the biggest thing was just people seeing us, knowing that we were just a couple buds with a camcorder and not a whole lot of money or resources or props or what have you, and making something that worked anyway, and then them just saying, well, I can do that.
I'd say one of the greatest influences that it had on people was the recognition of you don't have to be anything or anybody in quotations in order to go and make something brilliant. Grab your camera, walk out into the woods, do something interesting. That's all. You have that capability, because it was effectively no budget and no real team behind it than just me and my two buddies, you know? And off they went. And that really woke people up, I think, to their own ability, that you don't know what could happen. You don't know how brilliant it could be.
Even though, like, the story of Marble Hornets didn't so much influence, like, Daisy Brown or any of that, I think it just influenced me, like, seeing that it was possible. Like, you don't need a studio, you don't need money or funding or any of it. Like, these were actual just people who had an idea that they wanted to do, and they did it. And that was, like, that opened Pandora's box.
I'm pretty sure every single person, well, almost every single person who's into Slenderverse has tried to make their own, imprinted on me, basically. In the cultural sense, and I started becoming super into it.
Marble Hornets was obviously the reason a lot of us started.
Since then, we've had a cascade of all sorts of different forms of creativity, because it gave people that awareness of you don't need someone's permission. It's not even a fact of breaking down gatekeeping. It said there is no gate. Just fucking walk through. There's no gate. And I'd say that's its greatest achievement and influence on everything that came after.
I think the big appeal to it is just there's enough to work with, but it's enough of a blank slate that you can still make it your own. Ultimately, I think one thing that this experience has taught me is that a genre is just whenever a bunch of people copy the same things. And I don't mean copy in a bad way, because everybody copies to some degree or another, but just they all kind of follow similar patterns, but they take different paths in the same forest, I guess you could say.
From the first day of his creation on June 10th, 2009, Slenderman took the Something Awful forums by storm. Reading through that initial thread tells a story. Even in the earliest pages, forum users were highly responsive to Victor Surge's character, and largely indifferent to most of the other paranormal images. By page 10, the thread is dominated by new Slenderman stories and images from independent users, and comments about the character, debating his traits, discussing his mythology, and planning how to spread the character further via Wikipedia, Twitter, and other online platforms. By page 20, it is no longer a thread about creating paranormal images. Nearly every comment is either a unique Slenderman creation, a comment about Slenderman, or a comment about Marble Hornets. Marble Hornets exploded onto the site, becoming a central topic of conversation from the moment of its creation on June 20th, 2009, only 10 days after the creation of Slenderman himself. As the first video series revolving around Slenderman, and depending on who you ask, the first true entry into the Slenderverse, Marble Hornet's status was and remains monumental. In the world of unfiction and ARGs, it's a force to be reckoned with, being the most successful Slenderman project ever created, and one of the most popular, well-respected unfiction web series of all time. As one of the few to spread to the mainstream in a significant way, we have it to thank for many of the styles of modern found footage, analog horror, alternate reality games, and of course, the Slenderverse itself. Not only did it spawn many of the narrative concepts used in other Slenderverse stories, it was also the most important work in building the Slenderverse community, and the modern unfiction community as a whole. Until 2017, when they shut down, discussion around ARGs and unfiction projects were concentrated on unfiction.com and its unforums, which quickly latched onto Marble Hornets and the Slenderman mythos as a whole. Quickly dominating the unfiction scene, Marble Hornet became a catalyst for an explosion in grassroots alternate reality game puzzle creation and independent filmmaking, successfully moving the medium away from corporate influence and opening the door for more independent artists to create ARGs and step into the world of filmmaking. It was the reason thousands of filmmakers reached for their cameras for the first time, myself included. It adapted Victor Surge's Slenderman myth to an audiovisual medium and showed people what types of stories could be told with the character, introducing nearly all of his now iconic powers, like teleportation, electrical interference, the amnesia-like slender sickness, and, kind of accidentally, the idea of servants of Slenderman known as proxies. And despite it being considered technically separate and non-canon to the interconnected mythology we call the Slenderverse, even going so far as to call their version of Slenderman the Operator instead of Slenderman, Marble Hornets definitively birthed the Slenderverse, igniting more interest in the character than the SomethingAwful forums by far, and serving as the progenitor of the style and format of literally all Slenderman vlog projects, like the later EverymanHYBRID. Without question, it was the origin of the Slenderverse, both as a narrative and an online community. But it wasn't the only foundational project that year. Alongside Slenderman video projects like Marble Hornets, there was simultaneously an interlinked but separate medium for Slenderman stories. A medium that had an equal, if not greater number of creators than the vlog side of the Slenderverse, and a somewhat independent trajectory in terms of its stylistic development. The other side of the Slenderverse. The written world of Slenderverse blogs. On July 29, 2009, a little over a month after the birth of Marble Hornets, the first Slenderman blog began, instantly cementing blogs as a second viable medium for the character. Just as Marble Hornets was to vlogs, this first blog project, known as Just Another Fool, cemented itself as the foundational building block for the style and format of the Slenderverse blog projects.
Just Another Fool I remember because outside of Marble Hornets, that was kind of the big one at the time.
Hello, I am Dav Flamrock, as you may have already discerned. You may also be aware of Just Another Fool, the blog that Logan set up just before receiving the notebook of his late friend Matthew Selby. As you may also know, Logan has gone missing and his friend Joshua has received the notebook and since sent it to me, which is the purpose of this video, to open it and examine the notebook.
Sadly, I am not super familiar with like the blog world of the Slenderverse. I know that it was very thriving though, and there were some that were incredibly popular that had, a very big following.
It was the first Slender blog ever written. It was essentially like the second Slenderman work. Like Marble Hornets came first and had put out a few videos, but apart from that, like Just Another Fool was the only full story that people had. It was the first complete Slenderman story.
Just Another Fool developed almost directly out of the Marble Hornets fandom. It spread mostly among the MH community sites, mostly Unfiction and the Marble Hornets wiki, which I helped set up, and people received it as a narrative extension to Marble Hornets. The whole Slenderman mythos, after all, was constructed through indirect collaboration, so the idea that this blog was just telling another element of the same Slenderman myth made correlation between the two stories natural. Only once other Slenderman ARG likes popped up did it start getting classified as a side story.
The side story blogs and everything started popping up a lot when I would be, reading through the Unfiction forums or something. I read a few of them. I did read some of this one called Just Another Fool, and the guy who made it actually contacted me asking, if I wanted to collaborate with him in any way. But, I mean, I had to tell him, we have already written our thing out, good luck, but, we can't really be affiliated.
But, I wish them well in all their endeavors.
It had, kind of shorter posts, and it was something that wasn't particularly character-driven. The protagonist even changes at, the blog author changes at some point, but the protagonist had a friend who was over in Iraq. He had gone through a traumatic experience there, experienced, PTSD.
Those who know the story, these are the tally marks of Matthew's, I believe it was weeks that he was on tour in Iraq before the unfortunate events involving the Slender Man.
Just Another Fool had a very active, very violent Slender Man, which is not something that a lot of the other character-driven stuff had.
The story that we pieced together from Matt's limited responses was that, in his mind, the Slender Man attacked his squad while in the town. 3 of his squad mates' bodies were thrown into a nearby tree, while the rest of them, as well as 2 civilian children, were murdered by the Slender Man as well. At some point, the bodies became engulfed in flames.
He had this moleskine notebook that he had been making notes in and making drawings of this strange spider-like creature, interestingly enough, with a hat in some pictures.
It incorporated ARG elements, it had pictures, it had all these different little puzzles to it, and then it just vanished. It just stopped updating.
Mostly the whole experience revolved around the journal, what clues and puzzles were in it, and what the fallout of the journal was for the characters on the blog as they inevitably got more and more haunted by the Slender Man stuff. But me being super into role-playing and storytelling, I thought it would be fun to play along, and fortunately Alex, the author, wasn't put off by it. When it was time for him to send out the journal, he decided that he wanted to send it to me as the most involved player. In true Blair Witch fashion, the story ended with "I'm going to go out and check on a thing, shouldn't be more than a few hours," with no follow-up, implying the character died out there. A week after the last blog post, we had a Q&A chat with the author in IRC, where we got to ask questions of him out of character about the story, so it was very clear when the story was over. Alex was pretty involved in the community. We were all just imaginative Slenderman fans, after all.
It's very much what you would expect of a very basic Slenderman story, but it was first, and it's something that, it's very understated. Just Another Fool did a lot of building of the character that other stuff followed up on. A lot of the stuff that it introduced may have been rejected, but it's still, a very important work in the Slenderverse, and it's one that I think gets the short end of the stick more often than it should.
In an incredibly short period of time in 2009, Slenderman had been created by Victor Surge, turned into an urban legend by the SomethingAwful forums, adapted into a found footage ARG by Troy Wagner, Joseph Delage, and Tim Sutton, and now used for immersive blogs. Slenderman was quickly spreading throughout the internet, and even being discussed on the popular radio show Coast to Coast. And with the second foundational project of the Slenderverse, Just Another Fool, seemingly created by the unfiction forums user Noli, otherwise known as Alex, a new myth for the modern era was being built online. A boogeyman for the information age. In the same way as legends and myths from history, he was built collaboratively, and many of his traits came as a result of the culture he originated from and the era of technology that its creators lived within. At this time, the barrier of entry for creating unfiction, alternate reality games, and internet horror in general had been lowered significantly. New artists would soon come flooding in as they realized that creating stories with Slenderman was not only possible, but also incredibly accessible. Even in 2009, as Slenderman was only a whisper on the web, other Slenderman stories, consistently referred to by the community and even creators themselves as side stories to Marble Hornets, were being written in the wake of these initial 2 projects, including other Slenderman-centric blogs and social media stories like Slender Hunter. However, in the following year, Slenderman would further emerge from the shadows. Soon after Marble Hornets and Just Another Fool, the development of Slenderman vlog and blog projects would kick into high gear, and we would witness the first steps towards the interconnected Slenderverse as we know it today. a body of loosely connected narrative works with significant stylistic overlap that occasionally cross over and reference each other's stories, a la the MCU. With the birth of the Slender Man on Something Awful, and the development of the character throughout 2009, the community and interlinked mythology that would later come to be known as the Slenderverse had already been set into motion. It would soon begin to form together, both as a connected narrative and in the eyes of fans, as more blog and vlog projects began in 2010, building this character, community, and universe further than ever before.
What's going on, Internet? I am Vinny Everyman, and this is Everyman Hybrid.
I'm Jeff Koval. I did Everyman Hybrid with Vinny Caffarello and Evan Jennings.
I put on my hat. I haven't worn it in a while. I figured we'll be in the spirit. The last time I wore it was gardening, so it's covered in dirt. Everyman Hybrid was the first one, I think. They were the only ones that started, I think, while we were still making season 1. And I do remember thinking the premise was pretty cool.
It's kind of like a modern day telling of The Boy Who Cries Wolf, about a group of friends who get exactly what they wish for when they want more views on their YouTube channel.
I'll check. It's Daniel. You guys ready to Slender shoot? Yeah, but where's the tie? I left it in the car. Where's the mask? In the car.
But they become wrapped up in a story much greater than their shitty little YouTube channel.
What do you mean, man? I left it in the car.
Everyman Hybrid, like the reason that their vlog started was because they were trying to make a fitness blog, and then it just kind of veered off from there when they started doing like sleep studies and they started noticing weird things.
That wasn't Motorhead.
It was like a parody of Marble Hornets, but then they're getting haunted for real. You know, like kind of the movie within a movie thing.
Someone broke into Evan's house pretending to be, you know, our Slenderman character. And we're not going to go into details with where our Slenderman and his end, you know, ours ends and his begins, but let's just say that not all of them are ours.
You know, it plays with the afterlife, it plays with survival, it plays with friendships and relationships in the modern day, and it just spirals out of control.
He doesn't exist, dude. He doesn't exist. Well, right now. Wait, how did he get out of the room? It's a second story window. Gun it. Fuck her down.
In terms of a greater canon, we were lucky that there really wasn't much out there at that point. You know, there was really Marble Hornets as the video series. So not being distracted by potentially at this point hundreds of projects, I think by having something in mind we wanted to do, getting the spine of that down and then running with it is what benefited us. It's easy to be groundbreaking when there's literally one other person doing it, or, you know, one other project doing it. So we were lucky that we had an idea we wanted and we ran with it. I personally was really into early ARGs, but you know, at the time I didn't really even know that that's what they were called. The Halo 2 I Love Bees, that was a big one that I was interested in. But at that time, like my family, we didn't really have a good computer or anything. So I was like, I would hear about things like I Love Bees on G4 or something when I was at my grandparents' house. I was like, that is so cool. Like, what the hell is that? That, you know, people are it's not a video game, but it's not a book. So it was like this weird in between. So like I, you know, through osmosis knew what ARGs were, like with AI that had a big, that was one of the big first ones. I think that was the first one that used an ARG for marketing purposes. So that like late 2009 is when I was like, all right, so there's this whole world of not TV, not movies, of media out there. Let's dig into it. So that's when I started getting interested in what I discovered Slender Man.
So I first found out about Slender Man from Jeff. I went over his house. I can't remember why. It was for some bullshit thing. I used to just go to like Jeff and Vinny's house, like when I was just like, hey, I'm just in the area because I was getting something to eat. I'm just gonna come over, and they were like, okay, you know, like you just pop in. And so one night I just came in and I was talking to him about something.
and he was like, hey, wait, I want to show you something. Come here. I was like, okay.
And I remember we went to Vinny's house. We were in his basement watching, or playing Xbox on his pull-down movie screen. I was like, "Did you guys ever watch Marble Hornets?" And the rest is history.
And I was like, ew, what the fuck? I'm like, was that like real? What was it? And he goes, that's it. And it was like tapes found, like, oh, it's like a found footage thing. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, cool, man. That's fucking gross. What's it all about? And he goes, we could probably do this. And I was like, what do you mean, do that? And he's like, yeah. He goes, these guys are like popular and it's easy. You know what I mean? He's like, and he goes, oh, I might get in trouble for this, but he's like, they don't have like a story. And he's like, imagine if you just put a story to it, or like, dialogue. And I was like, so fucking yeah, man, we could do that. And he's like, we could do that, right? And so I was like, yeah, man, let's talk to Vinny. And Vinny was like, had like the best cameras and shit. Vinny is like a tech guy.
I was in school with Vinny since middle school at that point. And, the three of us, we all went to the same high school. But like I said, at that time, at least what I was seeing on YouTube was just people talking about their daily stuff, or tech news or gaming news. And it's like, you have the world at your fingertips and you want to just make TMZ online. Like, I didn't understand that. So I'm like, well, what could what could I do that would be interesting? And we all, me and my friends knew we had the ability to tell a story. So it's like, well, what if we take what we have and put it on YouTube? I just, at that time, because I was cynical and edgy, and I was like, all these normies, like, I didn't care about vlogging channels. Like, I wanted to do something cool. But I think over that winter break, my aunt and uncle got me a hardcover copy of House of Leaves. I read that in like a week, and I think that that was the pushing point of January 2010. I was like, all right, I'm reading cool stuff. I love this type of storytelling. I was looking at YouTube and pulling my hair out for the last 6 months. Let's do something. So that's how we're like, all right, we have our infrastructure, we have our playground to play with. What kind of story are we going to tell? And it was over that winter that I was, all right, the Slender Man thing is pretty damn cool.
We got together and we just started doing it because it felt very approachable. And then we were like, let's get one of those masks, and you know what I mean? It was actually a Zentai sex suit, is I think what they were called back in the day before they were like the morph suits. But it was like these super tight suits where they're like, it's sensation. So I think it was for like sex stuff. That's what Jeff said it was. I think that's where he found it off of some like Chinese website or something. this suit, yeah. But yeah, so I first saw it from them, and we said we could do this, so we did.
In terms of developing the actual project, taking it back to Blair Witch, it's like, well, you can't make it obvious from the get-go. So in my mind, my thinking was, how does this look like it belongs on YouTube before shit hits the fan? So that's how the fitness series came up, because that daily health vlogs, that was a big thing. We always wanted it to have very heavy character, a very heavy friendship, visible on the screen. So I think that was like our starting point, is like a happy Blair Witch that goes off the rails that exists on YouTube. It's funny, out of writing the entire project, writing the fitness episodes were the most tedious, because we're like, we wanted to give real information, but none of us could give a shit about exercise.
Have you seen our first videos? We literally just jumped outside and did it. So there was, we just immediately started filming. We just filmed because we were like, whatever, who gives a shit? And then we were editing. And when we filmed it, it was they were so bad, obviously, because we don't know what we were doing. And then by like episode 6, I think is when Vinny was like, I got this, and he edited this like insane. And that was like when it kicked the fuck off. We were like, oh, this is gonna be sick. Let's do it.
Episode 6 with the famous hallway scene and the stuttering light. That was like the big first reveal. That was like the initial turning point that started setting us up to be second to Marble Hornets.
In Everyman Hybrid, literally the jaw drop moment for me was when they had like Slenderman in the background and they revealed that like they were trying to like stage a scary video, but then it turned out it was actually the operator. Are you kidding me? That's genius.
I guess Marble Hornets was our ceiling, but we were just so excited to, you know, do better than them and you know, get our story out there. We felt, you know, as hard-headed high school seniors, you know, we could do that. You know, we have our way of what we want to tell. That turning point was when we jumped from like 20 subscribers to 1,000. And at that point, mentally, we were set. You know, we had an audience, so we just had to get out there and play now.
It was only supposed to be like 10 episodes, maybe, all told, and then we were all going to be dead. And there was reasons that didn't happen. But now that we weren't ending quickly, I saw it as seeing the characters through to the end. You know what I mean? Like, we created these, now let's do something with them.
They won't let me go.
I don't think they're gonna let any of us go, Evan.
I think if you want it to be a Slender Man thing, it can't be too long because he can't hold camera time very well. He's best in short bursts and to be viewed very shortly. And so to fill in those gaps, we introduced, you know, Habit.
Can I come in?
Yeah, Evan played it perfectly. In my mind, I think of half the story, Slender Man is the only driving force of evil. Halfway on, Habit hijacks it.
Vinny! How are you, friend? Come on in here.
Okay, so the concept is this. These kids, they die again and again and again. They are essentially recycled by this thing. He basically spits these kids out. They reach a wide audience. They reach people. And then he reaps all the people.
How many bodies have we taken from you? All torn apart.
Him and the Habit kind of do this together. And you have Evan, who becomes tainted by this monster because he has his own agendas. And the Habit is sort of like this awful, parasitic sort of creature.
I've watched civilizations rise and fall.
And so you watch these three people who are the cause of all the suffering that they experience and are and they are what brings death to all these people around them. Everybody dies because of them or by them. And then they die. They get kicked back to the toy box, and then sooner or later, they're going to be brought out again. And so it's this never-ending cycle of them essentially in hell. But, you know, not true hell, but what I would imagine is worse, which is just this perpetual, you are a tool for death and destruction. The hopelessness was always the point, is, you know, this awfulness cannot be escaped, and that no matter how much light you have, Kornthal, Jeff's character, it doesn't matter. It's nothing in the face of these essentially these gods or demigods. But where it comes in is like you get attached to the characters, and then we tell you that they're awful little monsterlings and that they're in hell forever. And then it's like, oh!
What do you think about that?
I feel like it's my fault.
So the overarching story of what I just said of like these, you know, they die again and again, and like, you know, the Habit is this creature that's all been throughout time, and they've all been throughout time. That came from like a 2-hour conversation between me and Vinny in my basement. I called him and we just started riffing. We just riffed and riffed and riffed and riffed and riffed. And that was like, we set the skeleton. The idea was to end with this crescendo of Slender Man. We had a plan for him, dragging Vinny across the floor, fucking shit coming out of his back, right? You know what I mean? Or like sticks. Like, we didn't want tentacles, we wanted like sticks and branches. And then as we went further, we reached that like precipice. And I think even Vinny was like, there's no way we can, there's no fucking way. And so we started making other shit. And so some of it was just me going, okay, well, I have an idea. And then I had ideas, you know what I mean? And so like, and I created more. I created a story. I created this stuff going on. So then we just saw it through to the end. And then me and Vinny got real into it. Vinny had like a revitalization of it at one point, and he was like, oh, what if we did this? And he got really into their interactions, you know, him and Habit's interactions.
What's in here?
And then it eventually just became the Habit show.
Vinny. We're gonna have a lot of fun.
It's gonna sound really funny, but he's like, what Pikachu is to Pokemon, Habit is to EMH. You know, moms see Pikachu and they know that's a Pikaman. You know, they know that's that belongs to the Poke world.
You think you're untouchable? Not even God could hide from me.
The reaction that they had towards towards Habit was not what I intended. So what I intended was, you know, Freddy Krueger-esque, where it's like, ha ha ha, you know, okay, he's funny to listen to, but he's a real fucking piece of shit. I wanted the audience to root for his death and his downfall because he's killing everybody, right? He's just fucking killing everybody. And these are like your characters. He kills Jeff. Everybody loves Jeff. But he kills all these people. And you're like, what a fucking monster. And then you find out all the stories about him and how like horrific he was. Diabolical scum of the earth. You know, fucking put him in the dirt. Not the effect that the audience had. The audience went the other way with it. And instead it became this like, they loved him. And I did not intend for that. I was having fun with the role, but I didn't want him to be likable. I just wanted him to be like funny and then be a piece of shit. But oh boy, I ate a baby. They didn't care. You know what I mean? Like he ate a baby and they were like, yeah, it's fine. Like it's like, what the fuck are we talking about? Like what? You know what I mean? I don't understand, but that's also because I didn't understand you know, I didn't know what monster fuckers were at the time. And now I do. And so now I understand like what. And then it got worse when I drew what he like looks like, you know what I mean? He's like a big wolf monster, whatever, bug wolf. That just made it worse. But I love it. I think it's great. You know what I mean? I love that people love him. He's such a big part of my life now. You know what I mean? I'm glad that I gave birth to him. I'm glad that I spawned him from my loins. And I'm glad that people enjoy him, whatever joy he brings to people, no matter how sick or perverse. I think it's great. I think it's great.
When we first started, it probably wasn't nearly as mature as we have it now, but definitely over time, we looked at different phases of the project as specific genres.
Okay, it was as follows: Jeff, Evan, Vinny. And so it was our stories, right?
At first, it was like Scooby-Doo mystery. You know, everybody's alive. All the friends are laughing with one another. And then it went Scooby-Doo to slasher to survival horror.
So Arc 1, Arc 2, and Arc 3. And Arc 1 was Jeff. He gets killed. His brother gets killed. Then all of Habit births out and is like, ah, and is just being a shit. And then the end, which is Vinny's like awakening into his own horror of what he is.
I'm gonna help you, Vin. I'm not gonna kill you. No, I'm gonna keep you around for a while. I'm gonna show you some things. Shit that would blow your fucking mind.
And that was from where he's, you know, kind of imprisoned by Habit, which is a lot of me interacting with him. And that's where you saw a lot of the Sham House, I believe.
I've been in this apartment since that night at Jeff's house.
So when I said Scooby-Doo, slasher, and survival horror, that's literally me, Evan, and Vinny, you know? And anyone who knows our characters and knows our behind-the-scenes selves know that that's obvious.
When it came to different styles, my God, did we have different styles. If Jeff had his way, it would have been this fucking bullshit him sad about Jesselyn the entire goddamn. That's why we had to kill him. We were like, we have to just kill him. Like we've talked to him 100 times. Like, bro, we gotta move away. Like this story sucks. Like no one gives a shit about your fucking girlfriend. She's dead. Let's go to the next one. And he's like, let's just do one more episode.
I want Goonies in everything I do. Evan wants gore in everything he does. Vinny's going to tap into that psychological aspect of everything he does.
I want blood, right? I want violence. I want death. I'll say that on a microphone. I wanted blood. Vinny loves the whole timey-wimey shit and ARG shit. He was really into that. Jeff was also really into the ARG stuff. Vinny, he likes the old school kind of ARG or like geocache shit and stuff like that. He liked that shit. I honestly could not care less about the ARG aspect. I only cared about the story, the blood. I want to eat somebody. That was my thing.
Accommodating those differences was very interesting, and then getting to do that with other people was just, you know, frosting on the cake, really.
We had these very different styles, but I think as it went on, we just figured out how to do it, you know, and then it just started to really spiral and blend in a very good way. We still argued constantly. Everyman Hybrid was not a clean-cut, easy, organized project. It was chaos. It was fucking chaos, bro. The fact that it came out in any kind of tangible way boggles my fucking mind, you know, because it was nuts. It was nuts.
Again, I don't know if we knew what we were getting ourselves into. We knew we were going to do ARG elements, but how involved it was going to get, we had no idea at the beginning. And me personally, my love for those old ARGs that I was mentioning, that was like, what have people done? What do academics like about it? What can you improve? And that's kind of like, that was our starting point. I mean, from the get-go, we wanted to make it feel real. You know, we were prepared to never tell our full names, have private Facebook accounts, the whole nine. But, you know, that fell apart rather quickly, and then the creators group happened, so that lasted maybe 6 months. My poor brother was the one who broke the dam because somebody added him on Facebook thinking it was a part of the series. And he was like, oh no, and he shuts out his window and closes the laptop. He's like, Jeff, like, not realizing that, all right, we've been found out. It was positive, though. It was so cool and kind of unhealthy, the keeping tabs and tracking I did in real time for these elements. And, you know, we didn't have like all the tools of Google Drive and stuff back then. When we did 7 trials of Habit, when we sent out those first 313 emails or whatever, that was all by hand. I tracked everyone's email that apply to that by hand into an Access database. I still have that lying around somewhere, which is kind of weird to think about.
Jeff really liked talking to people. That was his thing. He wanted people to talk to him. So the trials and stuff, that was him. That was all him. He just wanted to sit there and talk to people, but it was cool. He got people to, like, you know, compete and do all this. He loves that shit. So where did it come from? That is his baby. 1,100%.
I think they didn't realize at the time, or maybe they did realize, that while it was a brilliant thing to do for a committed viewer base and a group of followers for the mystery, that they were also telling everybody else, you think that's cool? Hold my beer. Watch. You guys think it can't get better than what you're doing? Well, you know what? Let me show you what bravery is. Watch us do this as regular Joes, where we do not have the power to buy out storefronts or order birthday cakes with phones inside them for the Dark Knight ARG. What if we can do our own version of that? What do we think we can do under our own power? And let's go out and do that.
So I'd say 90% of the ARG drop, you know, dead drops, were resounding successes. We were a little hesitant about, well, are enough people even watching this? And I think that's why our first drop was right outside of Princeton, because we could monitor it. You know, it was right like a mile past the mall that we would go to every week. Once that first one hit, we're like, all right, so this is something we can definitely do. Like we wanted to do it, but now it's like, all right, the fish will take the hook. So that was really cool as a creator to experience.
And by the nature of them doing that, once again, they did something that Marble Hornets did that was massively influential to everybody else. They showed the Emperor has no clothes. There is no gate. Walk through. Be brave. And amazing things can and will happen. And that's exactly what occurred, is that nobody did what they did with Habit's trials. When I got to the trials and saw the videos of these committed followers, these committed viewers, performing these things, just to know you 3 random guys from New Jersey with not a lick of fame or money or resources to your names created something so powerful at such a young stage of social networking and online influence that you got people not only to follow your project, but to go out and physically do something for it. That is an achievement and a half.
This is Rabbit17. Good luck to every other rabbit. And Habit made me do it.
There's just something so beautiful about that connectivity and that ability to say, okay, what we're doing is already so unique, and who inspired us was already so unique, but let's take it a step further. What can we do that's even bolder than what we're already doing or what has been done?
I know for a fact he received a lot of messages from people saying like, hey, this actually helped me with my agoraphobia, or like this helped me with my social interaction, because people would like go into a public place and just read the poem. I wrote that poem, so like that's my contribution. Was like this silly. I wrote it in like one night at like 1 a.m. I was like, you know, it would be cool.
Little rabbits feed our habits. We are millions fierce and strong.
The bloodthirsty rage within us urges that we move on.
Do not fight the forever flood of paranoia, hate, and fear.
Because I will be with you all. I'll always be right here.
Try to stop me if you can, but you'll break the habits of man. With love, Habit. Habit made me do it.
It gives you goosebumps. It gave me goosebumps watching these videos, realizing they didn't need a team, they didn't need money, they created that. And that is a load of memories that those people will have forever now.
Honestly, I can't tell you the challenges. I don't remember. He would tell us about them, but like I wasn't that involved. But it really grew a life of its own. I think people still have like little ones here or there on like chat rooms and stuff. The whole role play side of it, you know. So it was a hit. It was a success.
No offense to the dear viewers watching this, you could not pay me to participate in a fan-run 7 Trials of Habit, but the fact that those are still popular is incredible to me and really academically interesting to me, because this was supposed to be a one-off thing and people love it enough to do it. Pretty quickly, we hand-waved the whole earning money aspect. So the numbers were obviously very satisfying to see, like just attention, you know, comments, followers. That was satisfying because it was getting people interested in our story.
Yep, we made no money. We never sold merch. We just didn't give a shit. Golden our 15 minutes, and we just like.
I think we just wanted an audience.
I think that EverymanHYBRID did it better than everybody else, to be quite honest. EverymanHYBRID, in all the categories of what it did, was more powerful than its peers in terms of expressing the art, in terms of learning the lessons of Marble Hornets, and then applying new things, being inspired to change stuff around, introduce new elements, learning the lessons that needed to be learned, and creating something new.
It's nothing less than a miracle that we all lasted together 8 years, you know, relatively strongly, like very well. I don't know how we did it, and you know, we put aside ego and worked really well with one another. You're always going to nitpick your own work and wish you did something better or differently, but like this is something I'm so proud of us for doing and proud of my boys for sticking with us to do.
I love both of them. They're my brothers, and EverymanHYBRID is something we created together. It's something I created with my brothers, and how can I not love that? And I do. I love it very much. I poured a lot of my heart and soul into it, and looking back at it, I'm proud of it. Even it's got, you know, not every scene is great, not every part of it's great, but I love it.
Slender Man was an inflection point in internet history. It's no secret that the character himself would go on to become a viral phenomenon, but even at this early stage, he represented a rapidly evolving artistic movement. A perfect storm of an accessible character at a time when filmmaking and social media were becoming widely available to the average person for the first time. And with Marble Hornets establishing the foundation for what Slender Man could be, and the idea that anyone could make a project with him, EverymanHYBRID took its place as the true cornerstone of the Slenderverse. By creating its own primary villain with Habit, acknowledging pre-existing and forthcoming Slenderman works by other creators within its story, and by stating that it was not in the same continuity as Marble Hornets, it firmly established a distinct Everyman hybrid universe, which could later be identified as the Slenderverse, as something independent from the overarching Slenderman mythos. EverymanHYBRID built a rich, unique universe from the ground up, with a plethora of characters, supernatural entities, and pockets of lore. Not simply part of our real world, but a fully fledged alternate reality beyond it that other creators could build off of. And due to its transmedia nature, utilizing multiple formats like live streams, Twitter accounts, and a blog site called Can You See the Words, EverymanHYBRID helped to build a living, breathing world that Slenderman occupied. With the level of community interaction through its characters, puzzles, and social media, especially as part of the 7 Trials of Habit minigame, it was extraordinarily influential in forming a dedicated community for Slenderman ARGs and making players feel like they were interacting with a living, breathing universe that existed all around them. A universe which they could join at any time by becoming a creator. Its impact on the formation of the Slenderverse cannot be understated, nor can its impact on the development of alternate reality games and unfiction as a whole. As part of the so-called Big Three of the Slenderverse, EverymanHYBRID was yet another step in showing what was possible with the medium of unfiction, and was another massive leap towards turning ARGs into an independent art form rather than a rare and inaccessible corporate marketing tool. But with that being said, the third member of the Slenderverse's Big Three must be addressed before continuing on. I am of course discussing Tribe 12, a series which began in June of 2010 and grew to become the third largest Slenderman project by numbers, and served as a major building block of the Slenderverse. However, despite its historical impact and notoriety, this account of the Slenderverse's history will not be further analyzing Tribe 12 from a historical or creative perspective, nor will we be engaging with the content of the series or any individuals involved in its production. In 2020, multiple allegations were made against the creator of Tribe 12, stating that he used his online popularity and status within the Slenderverse community to groom and sexually assault multiple victims. We have no interest in featuring or engaging with this creator's work at this point in time. If you are a new or returning viewer of the Slenderverse who is unaware of this situation, we strongly advise that you proceed with caution in regards to this series as you explore the Slenderverse further. While it was never planned to be one, what most view the Slenderverse as today is an interconnected shared universe of characters and stories, built by audience interaction and independent creators, choosing to interact with each other in character. The shared focus on the authenticity of the found footage format, combined with shared online platforms and audiences, allowed these stories to be interwoven by viewers and creators incredibly easily. Fans were blurring the lines between projects and imagining a shared universe with each story bleeding into each other before the creators even began to connect their stories and characters themselves. Slowly but surely, though, they did. First with throwaway references like those in EverymanHYBRID, but soon with intricate and well-planned story crossovers that contained major events impacting the stories of the other projects in the universe. And while these intricate crossovers are commonly seen as something started and perpetuated by video projects like EverymanHYBRID, this is far from the truth. In fact, the true pioneers of the shared universe and collaborative mythmaking of the Slenderverse were those working in the other medium of Slenderverse blogs.
I am Andrew Koerner. I am a writer in the Slenderverse. I am probably best known for Slender Bloggins, one of 2 early blogs that focused on the mythos from an out of character perspective. The other one being Encyclopedia Slenderia. You know, I refer to myself kind of tongue-in-cheek as one of the foremost experts on the Slender Man. I don't think Just Another Fool ran for particularly long, but there were 3 blogs that started up pretty shortly after that ended up being like the 3 big pillars of the community. And those were Seeking Truth, Dreams in Darkness, and The Tutorial. Dreams in Darkness was a very straightforward Slender Man story, but it introduced a kind of backwoods cult. People just got invested in it because it was early on and because it was written better than a lot of the other stuff out there. Seeking Truth was probably the best showcase of something that you can really do in blogs that you can't do in video, really, because the main character of that was Zeke Strom, this sort of cowboy cop type, character.
Hello, I am Tom Horan. I was the writer of Seeking Truth and The Mystic, the Zeke Strom stories. Seeking Truth was about a series of disappearances that occurred in a New England town, and of the detective that was on the case trying to solve it, which inevitably let him discover the existence of Slender Man. I had gone into a few of the blogs that were around at that time, and I liked them, but I noticed they all kind of had the same formula. They kind of hit the same beats all at the same time. They have their experiences, they do a little research, they meet a friend, and then at the end they die. And it was just the same thing over and over. And while I did like them, it quickly become too formulaic, and I thought we could do some more with this. I think they were all trying to follow the Just Another Fool way of doing things. And it was things imitate until they innovate. So imitation happened, and then finally the innovation came in with like myself, with the hybrids. I don't think I consciously went about trying to think of like being like the rule breaker or like the reinventing the wheel, but I just thought it would be kind of an idea to, instead of just abruptly ending, to have a character that was like, no, I'm not going to go down without a fight, because it's just not in his nature.
It was a different type of story than anything that was being told in vlogs. So that's something that I think really worked to its advantage.
When I wrote Seeking Truth, I had no knowledge that it was gonna... I knew I was doing something different, but I didn't realize it was going to be something so gargantuanly game-changing for the universe. The general idea at the beginning was, we can't do anything against this thing. And then I kind of came along and be like, well, so what if we can't? Let's at least try.
I loved Tom's story. His idea, I remember him telling me like his idea, like he was like, I think he was like an investigator or something, like a paranormal investigator. I can't remember, but I remember him telling me, and I was like, this is fucking cool, bro. I liked Tom. He was a nice guy. Not that he's dead. I like him, just haven't talked to him in forever.
I remember Jeff name dropped Zeke in a live stream. Had no idea he was going to do that, but he just kind of in that kind of like started the back and forth between Hybrid and Zeke.
There were some that I wanted to cross over with, like Tom.
Zeke actually was part of the trials. He had actually entered the Habit trials. From there, like, it was more one of those things where like they acknowledged each other's existence, and when I did the finale video, I name dropped them.
You hybrid boys. Keep your eyes and ears open, okay? Your buddy Evan. However bad he is now, it's gonna get so much worse before it gets better.
There was always the intention of having a more serious crossover between the two, but it just never happened.
It's really hard going from a written series to a video series, especially when it's like, nobody had a budget. Like my good friend Tom, he writes this series about this hard-boiled, detective, and he has a gun and everything. It's like trying to make Marble Hornets into NYPD Blue. It's like that'd be really hard to do that kind of crossover thing with what our resources were.
But it was a lot easier in blogs where you're not bound to be like, you don't have to play a character that looks like you. You don't have to be in person with someone to cross over with them. You can just get that all figured out through text.
I knew how much of them were out there. I knew there were, they outnumbered video series easily because it was a more accessible medium, to be able to just write rather than have to worry about production costs and all that stuff. You could just write.
Yeah, there were a ton of blogs. It was a much lower barrier of entry than vlogs.
There was no travel involved. There was no special, effects involved. So they had the luxury of being able to collaborate earlier.
Video series, in order to maintain immersion, wouldn't include comments, whereas in a text medium, they left the comments on more often than not, just to interact directly with the audience. And that was how a lot of people from blogs found each other. They commented on each other's stuff. and got drawn into a bigger universe that way, even before the creators started interacting with each other personally and planning anything out.
I think that there was a lot of hesitation around if having crossovers and if clarifying that it was all in the same universe, instead of just hinting at it being in the same universe, that it would somehow break the world building that each person was doing. And I'm legit just saying crossovers of vlogs. There was so much reference in the vlogs to the blogs. So like that crossover universe was like already happening. It was kind of like anything that was blog pre-existed and was like used as reference material in the vlogs. But nobody was willing to make these hard steps into saying it is this or it is that, because part of the power was the communal aspect of building the myth. And so they didn't want to disqualify the other myths that people were building. So it was this very gentle build of not trying to make anything that was canon for them that would uncanonize someone else's myth.
There was a phrase used way back in the day, and then I think the term was dimensional bleeding.
When you get a bunch of people writing about a character who is, from its very inception, portrayed in different ways, like there's going to be inconsistencies with the portrayals. And then when crossovers get involved, all of a sudden you have these people who have these very different ideas of the Slender Man and what the Slender Man is, and they both have to reconcile their canon somehow.
I gotta be honest with you, as a narrative piece, the Slenderverse is a goddamn mess, and I think that's part of the beauty and the wonder of it, is that it doesn't work at all as a narrative.
Well, ultimately what Observe and Terminate did, which Observe and Terminate was a blog that was written by this essentially like supernatural strike force to contain and protect things from the Slender Man, but it raised the idea of dimensional bleeding, that being that these are all different dimensions that people are existing in, and the Slender Man is somehow causing them to fuse, to bleed into each other. And that accounted for a lot of different inconsistencies, because these people just don't exist in the reality until the Slender Man causes these dimensions to bleed into each other, dimensional bleeding.
You have all these different universes where all of our own individual series are happening, but because they're all linked by this cosmic entity, it's like you'll get some bleed over from like one world into another.
We all understood that there was an entity out there called Slender Man that was after all of us, regardless of if their stories contradicted each other.
If you're talking about the Slenderverse as a collection of stories that interacts with each other as a shared universe, the tutorial is probably the most important work to establishing that. That was the first work to really acknowledge the Slender Man as something that already existed. This is a work that starts with the lines, "This is all because of something awful. Fuck something awful."
It all started out so fun. Let's make paranormal images. Let's share them. Try to find where I doctored this picture. Fun. And then Marble Hornets came out, and all the other blogs and videos and everything started. So much fun. So many people thinking about Slender Man. So many people fearing it. This isn't a blog about how weird stuff will start happening to me. Then I get paranoid. Then I start to hear about Slender Man from other people and don't believe you until it's too late. That already happened to me. And I survived.
M was a character who, the titular tutorial was how to stay alive. You know, how to survive the Slender Man. And M did it by just continuing to move, to stay up high, which was this weird rule that he made that nobody else followed. But some of the other rules, like some of the other parts of the tutorial, were really picked up on, especially sort of the Sisyphean nature of it, of Escape from the Slender Man, because the stories, they never end happily. everyone either goes crazy or dies. And the tutorial sustained a story based on someone who survives that initial, oh no, he's stalking me, he's after me. It's just a continued, well, the end of the road is coming up at some point, but for now, this is me surviving.
M was a runner, if I recall. You had tutorial, you had, I think Slender Bloggins was technically a runner on the Chase's blog. A lot of the core theory bloggers, they were considered runners. Zeke and M had a bit of a friendly rivalry, I remember. They made a snip at me, I made a snip at them, and it kind of just went from there, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, Tutorial was a very influential blog at the time.
It acknowledged that the Slender Man was a character created by fiction. That's where the idea of like the Slender Man as a tulpa, I believe, is the term that people use for it. And within the Slenderverse, the way it was described was something that becomes real because of people's belief in it. And that opened up a lot of interesting lore ideas.
June 20, 2009. Has anyone thought about the possibility that we are creating a tulpa? It's a thought form that is realized through the efforts of a group of people. We might be creating the Slender Man, making him real.
Have you ever heard of the Philip phenomenon?
There was a book written about it called Conjuring of Philip.
In the 70s, a group of people in Canada literally thought a ghost into existence.
It was all fun and games until Philip started to take on a mind of his own.
They would sit around a table and think about Philip and make up stories about him and try to will him into existence. And then they did.
Philip became real, as far as any paranormal thing could be said to be real.
It was fun until it wasn't. Until my brother died.
And it does not get enough credit for that. But what does get a lot of credit for it is White Elephants, which proposed the idea of core theory.
This is the record of Rabbit Sagel. I'm going to analyze, dissect, and study the entity known as the Slender Man. I'm doing this so that I, or anyone else who wishes to help or follow my work, can develop a way to kill the bastard.
The idea behind core theory was essentially along the lines of like the Tulpa effect, where Slenderman is essentially a thought form, and by using that, they could inevitably defeat him.
If the Slender Man is this construct, is this tulpa that we have created, then we could, through utilizing fairy tale narratives, take it down like some dark lord.
The only thing you need to remember, it is a monster, but the monster bleeds.
You just threw out like 10 phrases that were like Vietnam flashbacks back and forth. Like, I haven't heard those phrases in a decade at this point. That's wild. Yeah, no, I couldn't even tell you what core theory really is at this point. But yeah, like I said, it's crazy. I remember hearing that, though, that phrase a million times. I knew it was a big component of written work.
I think that the idea of Slender Man is predicated on the fear of the unknown. And in that, it also folds in this idea of the more you know, the more at risk you are. With this idea of after you start knowing, then you become paranoid and you start looking behind you and you start looking back into your photos and you start seeing him. In that, what the actual fear is the fear of knowledge. So being inside of the internet, the aggregate of all of human knowledge, and having this compulsion to want to know more, and that making it more dangerous and more powerful ends up fueling this kind of meta space. It was this really rich foundation for establishing an ARG. And it was a rich foundation to be able to have that kind of direct access and that kind of direct cooperative building of the narrative.
White Elephants is kind of the seminal work of the second generation. You start to see more interconnectivity there. That was one that not only, acknowledged and mentioned other blogs, which, the early ones didn't do, but it tried giving like roles to people to make them part of a grander story at that point.
I remembered I liked the name that was given to Zeke Mystic, which is why I adopted it for the platform.
The character Robert Sagel would basically dole out these titles to people within the mythos. Like M from the tutorial was the Hermit. Then there were the three sages, the people who were trying to figure out, okay, well, what are the weaknesses? How can we survive? How do we do this? And then there was also like a fabled hero that would arrive, and he never chose a hero. And in fact, at some point, he changed like his role. He's like, well, I'm stepping down from Sage, and the other sages have kind of disappeared, so I'm appointing 3 new ones now. At a certain point, after Robert gave up his title of Sage, he started going by Greenlight. And then at a certain point, the blog got hacked in story and deleted, and there was a proxy who was behind it, an unnamed proxy, which one of the other sages had in his comments referred to as Red Light as opposed to Green Light. And I don't know why Red Light ended up just becoming a character, but Red Light was actually used in some other people's stuff, and those were the works that really developed the character. He just kind of got seen as the head proxy.
I had Red Light appear in an early Mystic entry. Yeah, Red Light, he was kind of essentially like a familiar in the same way that like Maskey or Conahan or any of those characters were. He seemed like a mix between the usual human proxies and like something a little bit more.
Proxies were servants of the Slender Man in some way, whether it be through brainwashing or whatever. I think that a lot of series, no matter its size, again, Slender Man was oftentimes viewed as a secondary antagonist over time. What were once secondary antagonists, they became the focus. And also they're the things that are unique to that series, whether it's like the Order or Habit or whatever.
That would be a good analog. Habit being, okay, well, this character could show up anywhere, and it's a character that is kind of like the Slender Man itself, very mysterious. So that made Red Light more interesting.
I know Red Light eventually went on to become like the community's thing.
Everyone just kind of seized on that, did stuff that they wanted with him. I think that some people killed him off, and other people were like, well, I want to use the character too, so they brought him back. And because of that, the character developed like these body hopping or hive mind powers. It was all really dumb, but at the same time, like, it was beautiful. It was this fiction that everyone was writing at the same time, all the time. The original proxy is not even a proxy, and that is, of course, Maskey from Marble Hornets. So, from the very start, the idea of the Slender Man having some form of mind control was part of the mythos, like, from the first sentence. The very first Victor Surge post, the flavor text beneath that, read, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." And that is the introduction of the Slender Man, and that's already alluding to the idea of proxies, the idea of how the Slender Man will force people to do things. But then, like, the extension of that was Maskey and Marble Hornets, just this weird masked person who seems to be in opposition to the protagonist.
They could have called my character anything at all, but they settled on Maskey. Why? Because he has a mask on his face. Later on, we had a character. Do you want to know what name they came up with for him? Hoodie. I'll give you 3 guesses why. And he was wearing a mask too, but someone else was already wearing a mask, so they couldn't use that one again. The word proxy, I'm not sure where that came from exactly, but that never really had anything to do with us, and I don't think we ever really saw it as that either. We didn't come up with that word, somebody else did, but then it got retroactively applied back to us, and now everyone like assumes that it had something to do with us.
It kind of started like the idea that the Slender Man needs a human antagonist, but then there were people who started utilizing that and just like killing off these waves of mind-controlled masked people. It caused a few people to think, well, wait a minute. You're just murdering like this poor cannon fodder. Like these people had lives. Like these people are victims. Are we not even going to stop and consider that? That's when you start to get a more sympathetic portrayal of proxies, and I think a lot of that started with Reach of What You Are in the Dark. I believe that was what introduced the term Revenant, essentially super-powered proxies. Like, the Slender Man had infected them with some sort of substance or power that allowed them to do things that, others couldn't. It started leaning into the whole sort of like pew-pew superpowers that the blogs always struggled with to an extent. It kind of lasted, but not really. What ended up sticking in the long run was actually proxies as having a bureaucratic structure. The blogs themselves, just this chaotic frenzy of energy, this type of writing unlike nothing else I've seen or experienced. It's something where you can look at these elements that other people have established and create kind of your own cohesive mythos through that. And it's just another element that people were able to incorporate into it. Like the Path of Black Leaves, that was something introduced by White Elephants. Essentially, it was this extra-dimensional pathway that would warp space. Like, Robert would go through on one end and he'd be on this path where black leaves are falling, and he would come out the other end somewhere else. It was essentially a way for the character to fast travel. And it was probably one of the best bits of lore that the blog added. What are some of the other things? The Bleeding Tree, a little less utilized by other people. That was created by Zero of A Hint of Serendipity, and then later Last Refuge of a Dangerous Man.
I saw a tree, and this tree was alone from the others. It was vastly different. It had this presence to it. Bodies of people I knew were impaled upon it. Their insides. Fuck. The tree bled.
It draws the mythos back to the idea of the Slender Man as a tree-like creature. Like, as far back as Just Another Fool, he's kind of been linked to the idea of Yggdrasil, the world tree. And it was very much like, Zero was like, yeah, feel free to use this. This is something that, other people can use. What I like to do, personally, is I like to put it in the Path of Black Leaves. A lot of this stuff, it's hard to give a proper canon to, because so much of it was left ambiguous, and, no rules, just vibes. Chaotic fiction is a good term for it, because it was written very chaotically. It was written actively and reactively. And it was something that was shifting by the day. The blogs are really a type of writing unlike anything else I've seen, because it's not quite roleplay. It's kind of like roleplay, but it's in this public forum. There was a whole term for inserting yourself into someone else's story. It was referred to as game jacking, and that is something that was very much looked down upon. White Elephants had a habit of engaging in stuff that people saw as a little too close to game jacking. And that's maybe because, that was something that took place, before all the creators were really in contact with each other.
White Elephants kind of had a self-imploding ending at the time.
So this was all ultimately leading up to the solstice. There was, in actual life, a winter solstice that I believe was on the full moon.
The solstice comes soon. It will be a powerful night. Who will stand with me and fight the Slender Man on that night? I won't wait for him any longer. I think he'll be vulnerable that night for a reason. Greenlight mentioned it. He'll be vulnerable because he'll be here. You know, more physically here than before. I can only hope that this day, today, does have meaning. As many of us who blog band together and rise as one to slay the monster. I'd rather die testing him for vulnerabilities on a lunar event than live another month wallowing in my own despair. Since I have a blade, I'd like to see if the Slender Man can survive being divided by 0.
There was a lot of importance and significance attached to that, and it just kind of fizzled out. Like, we didn't kill the Slender Man over the solstice, obviously. And after that, it was like, okay, well, I mean, what's the point of core theory anymore? Like, that was the opportunity, but no one was ever going to seize it. At that point, Robert as a character was growing increasingly unhinged, increasingly less trustworthy. So by the time the solstice came around, people were not on board with core theory just in general anymore. So there wasn't really a whole lot that happened with it. Again, it was another case of white elephants getting a little close to game jacking, just because everyone was like, well, I have my own storyline going on. I'm not just going to abandon it in the middle of things just for this solstice thing. That's why, like, one of the biggest crossover events I can remember from the Slenderverse was a wedding episode. That was on the blog Take the Myth, which was a big pillar of sort of the era that, like, the crossovers really started to become common. And they're like, well, you know, these two characters of mine are getting married. Let's, you know, make it a whole thing. We invite in a lot of, you know, the runners, and then the proxies as well showed up to crash the wedding. It was a complete plotless thing. It was an absolute mess, but it was something that didn't have a ton of impact on most people's plots long term, just because they showed up at a wedding, and that was like one of the biggest crossover events that the Slenderverse ever pulled off. And it was not this big climactic battle on the solstice. It was just, well, these people are getting married. I'd say the solstice kind of ended the second generation, because at that point it was like, okay, well, core theory is not really a thing that we're paying too much attention to anymore. It was kind of doomed to fail, but it was an important part of getting people to sort of interact and do that, like, more directly and create sort of a bigger universe, an acknowledgement of these other stories, making it a collaborative work rather than just a bunch of individual stories. It burnt out eventually, just like pretty much everything else in the Slenderverse. The Slenderverse was something that burned very hot, very bright, and very fast.
It's difficult to put into perspective what the Slenderverse truly was. It was all at once a collaborative folktale, a rapid-fire online community, and a shining beacon to artists of all backgrounds and levels of experience to join in on a phenomenon unlike anything seen on the internet before. Especially within the realm of Slenderverse blogs, writers had the opportunity to enter an ever-shifting world where they not only authored their story, but also blended together parallel tales from other blogs and role-played within those imagined worlds from the comment section. This framework used by the blogs was referred to by the community as chaotic fiction, where the trajectory and development of each individual story was dictated by the other Slenderman stories, authors, and the audience as much or more than it was by each individual creator. Over time, these incidental interactions built a vast network of connections between stories, solidifying them as being part of the same universe. And with the blog's acknowledgement of the Everyman Hybrid vlog series, as well as that series' reciprocated acknowledgement of some blogs, it became a universe that spanned mediums. In fact, a major step in that construction was Everyman Hybrid's Angora Chat, a real-time IRC text chat room which was, at the time, the primary hub for discussion about Everyman Hybrid and the Trials of Habit minigame. It allowed fans to connect and collaborate on Habit's rituals, and for characters like Jeff and Evan to interact with viewers in character. Furthermore, due to this in-character text-based format, the same as the blogs, it allowed blog characters to interact with each other, the audience, and the Everyman Hybrid characters in real time, particularly in a special Angora chat session on Everyman Hybrid's first birthday. Characters from blogs like Observe and Terminate, Seeking Truth, and The Tutorial appeared in the Angora chat at times, as well as other so far unmentioned figures like Dr. Cairo from Compile Truth, who acted as an investigative researcher of the Slender Man myth. Characters and creators had firmly acknowledged each other, demonstrating to the community their intention that each story, excluding Marble Hornets, was occurring in the same canon. And as 2010 came to a close, this newly established Slenderverse had already built up to a climactic crossover and developed a vast amount of lore. While initially hesitant and sometimes opposed to the shared universe concept, the community soon flocked around the idea of the Slenderverse, both on the Unforums and on the Slender Nation forums. Created in August 2010, Slender Nation provided a dedicated space for the Slenderverse community to gather, largely avoiding discussion of the overall Slenderman mythos online, and instead focusing on the vast network of unfiction vlogs and blogs that were exclusive to the Slenderverse canon. The Slenderverse had no limits on where it could be told and how it could spread. It was occurring all around us, on blogs, on social media, on YouTube, and even in people's real lives. Creators played with the possibility of an immersive space that could envelop the lives of creators and fans alike in a way that was truly unprecedented for a branch of unfiction. The Slender Man myth had evolved into a universe and a legend particularly suited for the culture of the time. And now, the floodgates were open. The Slenderverse had formed, and it was as if a signal flare had been shot out over the internet. Writers and filmmakers saw this character, a literal blank canvas without a face, and knew that they could add to the legend with merely a camera or keyboard. The Slenderverse burned so brightly, and it wouldn't stop for a long time. In the following years, it would come to be seen as more than just a universe of stories. It would come to be seen as the birthplace of one of the most iconic internet memes of all time. It would be seen as the foundation for a multi-million-dollar feature film. It would come to be seen as a found family to many people. It would come to be entangled with horrific real-life events. The Slenderverse was the start of an unfathomable number of developments in internet and unfiction history. And it all started with a mere forum thread, with an amateur video series, with an experimental blog, with creators inspired by those initial projects to make their own. Because that's the point, isn't it? Anyone can put their friend in a Slender Man costume. Anyone can make a Slender Man story. Cut! And soon enough, everyone would. Together. Of all the characters and franchises to go viral since the internet began, there are few more iconic than the Slender Man. But that's only part of the picture. The Slenderverse was the name of a community, working in their own way to revolutionize storytelling.
It felt a little lawless and it felt very reckless, but that was also the thrill.
It's a movement in like internet horror. It probably was groundbreaking.
It's impossible to encapsulate what was happening.